Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason. Here are your hosts, Richard Saunders and Stefan Sojka.
Welcome back, Richard.
Hey, Stefan. Now, you've heard of the story, the book, The Song of Fire and Ice.
Oh, yes.
Which is the Game of Thrones, right?
Yes, of course.
I've got a better story.
You have? What is
It's called The Story of Jet and Lag.
So, you have been quite the jet setter, haven't you? You just got back, didn't you?
A couple of days ago, and I don't even know what time it is, yesterday or tomorrow, but it's here now and we're here.
You're totally jet lagged.
Jet lagged.
You're looking pretty frazzled.
Thank you.
But you've got a bit of a Norwegian hairstyle. What's with that?
It means I haven't visited the barber yet. That's all that means. But look at this. It's a map of Oslo. One of my souvenirs.
Oh, look at that.
A little downtown Oslo. Oslo was a beautiful place to visit.
Yeah.
I was there, and thank you again to Kristen and Maynard for looking after me. I went to Dublin. Thank you for Fanula for looking after me. Then I went to QED in Manchester and spoke there.
Yeah.
And then I went and... Where did I go next? Yes, I went to Prague and was picked up by the wonderful, lovely Martina, who was part of the film festival in Olomouc, and we were driven there, and I spent the next week being at the film festival.
Goodness gracious me. Wow, was that a week, 2 weeks? How long did you spend all up?
A week, 3 weeks away.
3 weeks away.
Yeah.
You must have you're almost getting your own Skeptics frequent flyer program going.
I reckon I should.
I think you should.
Now, listeners, you may remember that on last week's show I was reporting from the film festival, and we announced the winner of the international competition, which was the movie The Grammar of Happiness, which is a really great science documentary.
Oh, yeah.
And the producer... Michael O'Neill is in Sydney, so they said, would I mind accepting on his behalf, because he couldn't be there. And I said, that's great, sure, I'll do that. And they presented me with, because he won twice, he won the student jury and the world jury, and I was part of the world jury.
Yeah.
So he got two of these, and I'll just open this box here.
What's that?
This is...
It looks like a club. Oh, no. It's making a noise.
A kaleidoscope.
A kaleidoscope.
It's a giant kaleidoscope.
Oh,
and it's engraved, and that's going to be delivered. Two of those are going to be delivered to Michael O'Neill, the producer.
Oh, I'm getting acid flashbacks now. Looking through this, I feel like John Lennon and... wow, look at that. Okay, that's wonderful.
When last week's show, when they said on stage, is there room in your suitcase? Two big, heavy kaleidoscopes. But... that's all in the past.
It's all in the past because we're getting on with another show as usual. Just everything just keeps moving forward in this time-based universe that we live in. The time and space universe. On this week's show, I speak to Deborah Hyde, who is the editor of the English Skeptic magazine. Is that right?
Yes. And she is an expert on things like vampires.
How can you be an expert on something that doesn't really exist?
That's a good question.
She's an expert on being sceptical about vampires.
Well, not exactly. Just the whole mythology and the folk history and all that. So we have a good chat coming up at the top of the show about vampires.
Oh,
we really do.
I'm scared.
I can tell you're scared.
Yep.
Also on this week's show, it's Dr. Rachie Reports. Now, Dr. Rachie is also reporting from QED in Manchester. Oh, that's where I interviewed Deborah Hyde, of course, with Stevyn Colgan, who is an ex-copper, who now works for QI, the TV show QI on the BBC.
Really? Doing security?
Well, not exactly. No, he's one of the writers.
Oh, really?
Researchers. Oh. And he gave a wonderful talk all about sort of thinking outside the box, coming up with interesting and different solutions to crime problems.
Oh, really?
And it was fascinating. And at the end of his talk, Richard Dawkins stood up from the audience and said, I want to congratulate you on your wonderful talk.
Is that right?
That's
exactly credibility.
Right. That's
credibility. That's a testimonial.
What an interesting interview Dr. Rachie has for us a little bit later in the show.
And she's been popping up in the mainstream media a bit lately.
Dr. Rachie, absolutely.
She's becoming quite almost as much of a legend as you.
Probably more so.
I saw her come up on, what's it, Sydney Morning Herald or something.
Yeah, she's been really widely published lately.
Yeah,
in fact, I think
everything.
On the next episode of the Skeptic Zone, there's a lot more news that I haven't got time to report this week about things that concern Dr. Rachie goings on and all sorts of things. All Simon Singh and libel reforms and the fake bomb detectors. All this news has been happening. It's so hard to keep up with it all.
When you're in Oslo, just living it up.
Wow, when you're swanning around Oslo and Dublin, it's
living at large.
It's a bit difficult.
So what's next?
Also, we have on this week's show, as we do. We have had for the last 6 weeks or so a week in science from the Royal Institution of Australia.
Ooh.
And this week, Dr. Paul Willis is taking a holiday, so we've got a fill-in, a stand-in this week. Well, she's a great understudy. Tania Meyer takes over this week for Dr. Paul Willis to give us a week in science.
Week in science in a few minutes.
Coming up later in the show.
That's right.
A week in science in a few minutes coming up later in the show. I'm with you. Sorry, it's the jet lag.
You get that.
And then a strange, spooky action with Maynard. He's speaking to Scott Bartle about weird government goings-on.
Weird government goings-on?
I'll say no more.
No, I don't think you should say anymore.
Because it's weird government.
It's weird, and if we say anything, we'll probably start to get our phones tapped and things. So we've got to be careful.
That's coming up to round off the show, but... I tell you what time is it in Oslo? I can't forget. Now, what time
Dublin,
is it in Olomouc
or Czech Republic,
or wherever the hell?
Actually, I met someone the other day. I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "Slovakia."
Yeah,
and
that's underneath.
That's right. Yeah. And he was telling me how Czechoslovakia used to be Czech and Slovakia.
That's
then
right.
It became Czechoslovakia, and now it's Czech and Slovakia again.
The Czech Republic and Slovakia.
You wish they'd make their minds up and all get along.
What I tell you what, just before we get onto the show. Olomouc, where I was, this university town, it's like this unspoiled little paradise in the middle of Europe. It's unbelievable. It's pleasant, it's calm, it's beautiful, historical. And if you find that video clip, the bells, listeners, if you go to YouTube and search for my YouTube account, which is Skeptic Zone Podcast, one word, you can see little videos of my adventures in Oslo and Dublin.
I've seen those. Yeah.
And including one, and you just skip forward a little bit, where I actually go up into a belfry and I stand right next to giant ringing bells.
I'm checking it out now.
Insane.
Here we go.
Here it is. Hear that?
Listen to that. And it's amazing there, Richard, because they do not have any OH&S or public liability laws over there. Because there's little kids with no earmuffs on standing right next to the bells going completely deaf within 20 years.
Within 20 years. I had earplugs, but if listeners go to my YouTube account, they can see that video.
And watch your brain turn to jelly.
And freak out. Well, my brain turned to jelly a long time ago.
It seems to have today, because we've had to stop and start this intro about 10 times.
10 times.
No one knows because you're awesome editing.
My editing, but I've been falling asleep between takes.
I know, having little power naps. But I think we should just get on with the show. It's too packed with stuff to delay any further.
Let's get on to the vampires.
Whoa.
Let's do it.
Whoa.
Deborah Hyde.
Hello, Richard.
Nice to catch up with you. I saw your talk last year at QED about werewolves, and I saw a little bit of your talk this time because I was just fresh off the plane about vampires. Apart from the interesting topics you investigate, you're also the am I right, the editor of The Skeptic, or what's the official title?
I'm the editor of The Skeptic. It's skeptic.org.uk, as opposed to the American publication.
And opposed to the Australian one, which is...
of course, yeah.
There's a few magazines called The Skeptic, but that's cool. Well, what an interesting range of interests you have, if I might say, but I am particularly... I do find those... monster ones fascinating. Now, monsters is a very crude term. What is the correct term for these sort of things you study, werewolves and vampires?
I call them unnatural predators. If you assume natural predators are things like lions and tigers, then these are unnatural, supernatural predators in effect, and unnatural just is a little bit more wieldy verbally.
I like that, unnatural predators, because it makes people think, what?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a catch in the brain there. Yeah. The classics are the werewolves, and you get a great talk on the werewolves, the vampires. What else do we have there?
Well, there are all sorts of draining vampiric-type creatures from all over the world. Every folklore has them, really. For unnatural predators, I also count witches in there, because even though they are mortal, they are still in league with supernatural powers, therefore that's where the unnatural element comes in. So possibly next year I'll do a tour on witchcraft. Just started the vampires, so...
How interesting. How interesting. That wouldn't have crossed my mind, because when I think of vampires, somehow I don't think they're human, are they? And werewolves aren't human, but witches I tend to think are more human.
Witches are human, but vampires are ex-human. They're dead humans.
Right.
And there is something of a crossover between werewolf and vampire folklore as well. Sometimes in the Balkans they thought that a person who is a werewolf in life would become a vampire after death. So it's any supernatural element that would then go on to attack live human beings, I think I would count in unnatural predators.
So that's the key definition there. It's some unworldly creature that preys on humans.
On human beings. And
any human beings.
Yes. Yeah. The patterns that we tend to see with deaths that are blamed on unnatural predators is premature death. And this is pretty much in pre-industrial societies, because we're very good at dealing with premature death these days. Most people get to their 70 years in 10.
Yeah.
But we see people who committed suicide, or children who died, or women who died in childbirth. Categories of person like that, and especially people who died in epidemics. That is when communities seem to come up with these supernatural explanations, and it's as though there's a kind of an urgency in it. People can accept that if somebody dies after they've performed all of their rituals of life and they've done their thing, that it's unpleasant but it's acceptable. Whereas if people are cut off in their prime, there seems to be some sort of intuitive sense that it's unpleasant, it's wrong, and so they look for a supernatural, So they look for a supernatural culprit, and then and there will be quite complex ideas about how this works, how metaphysical ideas about how the universe works and how these creatures work, and in turn what the human beings can do to defend themselves against them. And sometimes you simply get the scapegoating relief that you get from rituals. Sometimes there's no practical use at all. But quite often, especially with vampires, I think that you find that there are, you've got people coming up with a kind of intuitive science of what to do with bodies in epidemics, for example.
Right.
So,
which is certainly in our history, that was no unusual occurrence, epidemics and things like that.
So one of the things I virtually always say in any talk I do is that we have to get into the minds of our ancestors, and that is a very difficult thing to do because we live in a very, very different world. And in a world where you would have to be philosophical about losing a certain number of your children, in a world where, as a woman of reproductive age, you would have to be reasonably philosophical about dying in childbirth, and where epidemics would come along very regularly, then people were just more superstitious because life was more tenuous. It was very difficult. And I think it's only when we really, really realise that we can get into the minds of our ancestors.
So what do you think is the persistence with the fascination of these creatures, especially vampires, in our society?
The thing about vampires is I love horror movies, and
it's Hollywood, you think?
It is. I love the literary variety, the literary and film variety of vampire, but they are very, very different. During the 1900s, people during the 18 and 1900s, there was the romantic literature, and these themes were started to be used for something other than their original folkloric intent, and certainly the vampire changed. It wasn't a smelly, disgusting old corpse anymore. There could be, you've got your demon, brooding lover archetype. And so, even though I love this stuff for entertainment purposes, I wouldn't count myself as an expert on the literary vampire, because it really is an area especially all of its own. And because it's such a useful metaphor and it's such a potent kind of archetype, I think it's just very, very flexible. We can use it for whatever we like. We can use it in all circumstances, even today.
Oh, even today, and the modern vampire is slick and cool and handsome and all the rest of it, and can be won by the love of a young girl.
Yes, they're very aristocratic. They live by themselves. They are very powerful, personally as well as physically. So it's been said that vampires are aristocrats and zombies are a load of shambling proletariat at the mall, because just thoughtlessly consuming everything in their path. And that's certainly both of those allegories have been used in fiction. So you get different things out of these supernatural archetypes now.
You certainly do, but I think back to a movie like Nosferatu, where the vampire is a hideous old creature, truly horrifying. And then we think of the more comic ones like from Buffy or the Blue Moon, the Twilight series. And here we come, the handsome young men.
Yeah. Well, yes, I suppose so. I'm really, really not a fan of Twilight. I think the female characters are extremely passive. The thing about Nosferatu, and I use that in my talk, is Nosferatu was inspired by Dracula. In fact, the prints were nearly lost because Bram Stoker's estate thought that the work was plagiarised, which it was. And in Dracula brings a plague with him, and in Nosferatu he brings a plague. I didn't know that.
Right.
And when Count Orlok turns up in Nosferatu, he also brings a plague to the town. So in both of those respects, they are actually very traditional folkloric vampires. I suppose with Dracula you've got the kind of half and half, because he's still tall and aristocratic and handsome, whereas Orlok is not a nice looking fella. He looks like a demon.
That's certainly a major point, I think, now is the idea, and we get that, like we said earlier, vampires are tall and handsome and groovy, and all the rest of it, and which I always jars with me, because I think of a vampire as old, hideous, smelly, maybe death.
Yes.
The idea is that they are death.
Yes, they're death, and there is a sexual element to them in the original folklore. Not always, but sometimes. And there are certain types of Romanian vampire which are thought to possibly come back and worry their wives to death with their sexual demands. So in that case, you haven't got a gorgeous, attractive Bill Compton from True Blood type of lover. You just have this rotten, insistent thing that won't go away. And vampires can produce offspring.
And vampires can produce offspring. I thought, I guess we're thinking about different legends and things.
Those types of vampires can produce offspring, which are actually very good at detecting vampires.
Good heavens. Good heavens. I think there's a certain sexual element in the Dracula story, I know, because he had wives.
His three women with him, yes.
Women, wives, whatever. And they were vampires too, I think.
Yes, they were. And most filmic representations of that, I'm thinking of Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, is, they're very sexual.
Very sexy, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes. Which is, again, when you think what they should be is a representation of corpses and death and horror, it's odd to think, I guess if a vampire can be, a male vampire can be hip and cool and look great, I suppose a female vampire can be sexy and young and all the rest of it.
I guess so. One of my
Why not?
Well, one of my favourites is Dusk Till Dawn. I love that movie, and you've got Satanica Pandemonium played by
I don't think
Salma
I've seen
Hayek.
it. I don't think I've seen it. Dusk Till Dawn.
Dusk Till Dawn is my favourite two movies. It really is in two parts. It was directed by Robert Rodriguez, but it really bears the mark of Quentin Tarantino.
Right. I'm surprised I've missed it, though. I'm a fan of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it starts out as a road movie and then ends up Harvey Keitel as well and George Clooney, and it ends up as just a big old vampire schlock fest. Everybody's banging steaks and everybody else. It's really, really good. Good fun.
Oh, the good old days. The good old days of banging a steak into a vampire. Where have they gone? Well, what a fascinating area you're investigating. So, vampires, werewolves, and now witchcraft. What could possibly be next? I suppose it's endless.
It is endless. There are always ways of tackling this particular side of the human psyche. And I hope I never ever get to the end of it. I hope there's always something to do, because I just love it so much.
Well, it comes across in your talks, I must say. You give very entertaining talks, and I find the subject fascinating. I'm sure a lot of your audience do too. They're absolutely riveted by learning about the folklore and so on of werewolves. And I can't speak too much about the vampires because, as I said, because of my flight, I missed most of your talk, but I certainly remember your werewolf talk from a year ago.
I had a backhanded compliment from that werewolf talk, because I think a lot of skeptics here at this convention couldn't really see how skepticism and werewolves went together. And just as luck would have it, I was programmed so that I was the first session on Saturday, and there was nothing else going on at the same time. So if anybody wanted to be at QED, I was all that was available. And somebody said on Twitter, I'm very glad I watched that because I would never have chosen it. And so they said that they liked it, but they couldn't see the obvious sales point before they'd actually been. And I hope very much that now that they've seen the werewolves one, that the people who saw that will come on to a vampires one later, or witches one, or whatever, knowing that it's that kind of angle.
I'm sure they will. Well, look, every success with the Skeptic, the UK magazine. It's a wonderful magazine. You had some out there earlier, which you were promoting. I like the covers. The covers are always very entertaining, the UK Skeptic magazine.
The covers are absolutely awesome. We're very, very lucky to have a guy, a very talented artist called Neil Davis on the team, and he does us proud every single issue.
Fantastic. Deborah Hyde, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Hey, Kenny.
Oh, hi, Tom.
Nice day at this park, yeah?
Yes, great weather.
Oh, look, a unicorn.
Unicorn? There are no such things as unicorns, silly.
Yes, there is.
No, there isn't.
Hey, guys, what are you arguing about?
Tom thinks unicorns are real.
They so are.
Let's look this up in the Skeptic's Dictionary.
The what?
How can we do this in this park? There is no computer here.
You guys probably don't know about the Skeptic's Dictionary app. Available now for iPhone, iPad, and iPod Touch in the App Store.
Wow, cool.
The app lets you access all of the great Skeptic's Dictionary articles when you're on the go. Here, let me look up unicorns.
Oh, cool. Kenny, prepare to be proven wrong.
It says here, the unicorn is a creature from fables.
Aha!
Actually, I see now that someone just dumped their ice cream cone on that horse's head. Thanks, Skeptic's Dictionary iPhone app.
Welcome to A Week in Science from RiAus. Coming up in this week's episode, Australia's prehistoric population, lab-made petrol, and climate. In Australia, we now have 23 million people. Make that 23 million and one. So it's timely to look back at our prehistoric population. Radiocarbon dates from thousands of archaeological sites were compiled to determine that only 1,000 to 2,000 people formed Australia's founding population. This initial small group arrived about 50,000 years ago, then grew to approximately 1.1 million people at the time of European contact. The data also revealed the impacts of climatic events and other factors on Australia's first inhabitants. And now, 4 science headlines in 30 seconds. Low-fibre diets and high-fat intakes may worsen asthma by increasing airway inflammation and reducing lung function. We're finally saying farewell to genital warts, with diagnoses dropping up to 59% since the HPV vaccine was introduced 5 years ago. Marijuana pills provide more effective pain relief than smoking the drug, and scientists have used genetically engineered bacteria to create petrol in the lab that's identical to what you buy at the pump. 3 studies this week have provided further insight into our changing climate. First up, a compilation of over 500 climate records revealed that 1970 to 2000 was the warmest period globally for the past 1,400 years. Meanwhile, a second study found that around 20% of all land will change climate zone by the end of this century, increasing the risk of species extinction. And finally, changing rainfall patterns in the tropics may not depend on surface temperature, but instead be a direct result of increasing atmospheric carbon dioxide. And don't forget Monday's Vaccination Cafe in Adelaide. Get your flu jab for just $10 and chat with immunology researchers over a free coffee. info@riaus.org.au/immunise. That's been the highlights of another big week in science. For more information and other science news, check out the RiAus website, riaus.org.au, where you can also sign up for notifications of future episodes. You can follow A Week in Science on Twitter using the hashtag WeekInSci. I'm Tania Meyer, and on behalf of the RiAus team, see you next week.
In a world where the truth is a matter of opinion, messages are received from beyond the grave. And reason is sidelined for magical thinking. Only three men stand between the truth and a postmodernist abyss.
What date is it? 7th, 8th? 7th, 8th?
This is impressive.
Are these artist impressions?
They're not. They're photographs of Chinese lanterns.
It's not.
We are not well researched.
Yeah, because...
Good God, we're full
We
of
don't discuss cryptozoology on this show very often, because we don't know anything about it.
That's true. That is true.
The price gets lower and lower and lower, and then he hits a ceiling?
It's a ceiling from the room below.
Skeptics with a K from the Merseyside Skeptic Society. Find us on iTunes. Or, don't.
Now it's time for Dr. Rachie Reports with Dr. Rachael Dunlop.
So, hello, Stevyn Colgan.
Hello, how are you?
Now, you have a name that's familiar to me, but you're not the actor, Stevyn Colgan, are you?
No, that's Stevyn Colgan.
Oh, Stevyn Colgan.
Yeah, serious difference in bank balance.
Right, okay.
But one letter difference.
One letter. So, you gave us the very first talk of QED yesterday.
Indeed.
Entitled The Skeptical Bobby.
Mm-hmm.
Because you used to be a cop.
I did, yes.
So, tell us about your journey, because you gave an interesting story about how you became a policeman and it involved drinking and a note to your dad. Is that right?
Yeah. I was a bit of a sort of waster at school. I didn't try quite hard enough. I mean, part of it was the school I went to, sort of up until about the age of 11, was a very small, little sort of independent school where they had a lot of time for the pupils. So by the time we moved to a different town and I went to a big sort of state comprehensive, I found I was a little bit ahead of some of the other kids, and I got bored very quickly, and I was disruptive, and I was a bit of an arse, frankly. And it meant that by the time we got to the end of sort of state exams, at the age of 15, 16, I had absolutely no qualifications. All my friends were going off to uni, and I thought, what am I going to do in my life? And I was working as a sort of trainee chef in a restaurant, so I thought catering college might be something, because I had a bit of an aptitude for food, which is quite evident. If you could see the shape of me, you'd know what I mean. And I was also quite artistic. I'd always done the only qualifications I'd actually got in school were art ones. So I applied to an art college based on my portfolio and got it. So I was sitting there thinking I had a definite thing for catering college, definite thing for art college, but I had sort of 9 months to wait until the two, and then my 18th birthday turned up. And my dad, who was a homicide detective, took me out for a couple of beers at the local police club, and I woke up the next morning with a note in my pocket where I'd apparently not only accepted but also typed a contract saying that I would actually try being a cop for 6 months to the tune of 50 quid if I did it. And I thought, well, I've got 6 months to waste, why not? And I thought, if I'm going to do it, because I grew up in Cornwall, which is, as far from civilization as you can get probably in the UK. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do 6 months as a cop, I'll do it in London. So I'll see some gigs, visit some galleries. 6 months kind of turned into 30 years. So, yeah.
So tell us about the idea behind your being sceptical in the police force. There were some of the ideas you thought weren't particularly working well, and you applied scepticism to the way the police force works.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that I had that rather sort of wrong reason for joining the police in the first place, it never occurred to me to be a cop. Probably because I'd grown up with cops my whole life, and my dad being one. I sort of approached the whole thing a little bit tongue-in-cheek, thinking I'm only going to be here 6 months. So I had this idea in my head that anything I did wouldn't affect my career, because I wasn't going to have a career. And I turned up at sort of Hendon, which is the big police training college in London, and almost immediately from day one I thought, this doesn't ring true, because everything I'd ever seen about policing, certainly coming from sort of small communities in Cornwall, and everything indeed they were telling me about the history of the police was all about that the police was all about preservation of public tranquility, keeping people safe, preventing crime from happening. And yet everything we were being taught outside of the actual written word and the sort of mission statement of what policing is all about was about catching bad guys. It was all about catch the bad guys. This is how you catch them. These are the laws you use to catch them. This is how you hold on to them. This is how you handcuff them. This is how you push them on the ground. This is how you put them through the court system. And I thought, surely the emphasis should be on teaching me things that I can go out and sort of disseminate through the public about how to make themselves less likely to be the victims of crime, or how to make their property less attractive to people who want to steal it or damage it. And there was nothing. There was nothing to do with prevention. So almost immediately I hit the street. I was in conflict with the sort of the ways that we did things. I mean, that sceptical thing that's always been in my head, the sort of things that made me sort of challenge teachers in school, which is why I was so popular. It's this idea that, if something's wrong, I feel the need to not challenge it in an aggressive way, but say, is that really right, or is there a better way of doing it? And as I said, I sort of hit the street running, as it were, thinking, I want to do this my way because I think it's better, which is incredibly arrogant. I'm happy to admit, very arrogant.
It is.
But I started getting some really good results. Although that wasn't reflected in what the police thought of me, because...
No, they didn't like you much.
No, they really didn't. And my reports were sort of quite damning. And part of the problem is the methods of measurement. Because it's really easy to measure...
Yeah, how many cops how many robbers you caught.
Precisely, how many bad guys you caught, how many people you stopped and searched in the street, how many arrests you've had, how many successful prosecutions, prison population. All those things are really easy, measurable things. Whereas prevention's a really difficult thing to measure because you can't measure what if, and if I did an activity which I was pretty damn sure would actually disrupt the activities of a burglar or a car thief, and the figures dropped, even though it was sort of fairly obvious and blatantly obvious to anyone around me that my activities had caused that. Trying to prove it on paper takes a lot of time and effort. It can be done, but it takes a lot of time and effort, and there's never the time, and there's certainly never the effort, because you're on to the next thing. And so it did set me in conflict with the system, because even though I was getting results and I was getting nice letters from the public saying, oh, we really appreciate what the officer's done for us, and I've never felt so safe living where I live, on paper my figures were absolutely appalling. I was like the most idiotic cop in the world.
So tell me some of the interventions that you discussed yesterday. I mean, for example, you talked about preventing postering and graffitiing with a simple way of changing offence slightly.
Absolutely. Well, as I mentioned yesterday, there's three parts to every sort of problem, whether it's a crime or a community issue. And there's someone or something causing it, there's someone or something affected by it, and there's a place in time and space where those two come together. And all the focus in sort of traditional policing is on the what's causing it. It's all about catching the bad guy, taking them out of the picture. But as I said, if the conditions at the site are still the same, and the potential victims or the object of their desire isn't altered or modified in some way, there's still going to be a desire to nick them, and the location's still going to be suitable for that to happen.
By some other robber.
Precisely. You take the bad guy out, you create a job opportunity, new bad guy
for the next new bad guy.
Precisely. If you work on all three sides, though, then you kind of have a much better chance of solving the problem. And traditionally, we haven't done this because cops don't think about modifying locations because their job is to catch the bad guys.
Yeah.
They don't think about educating the public or talking to designers about products to make them less suitable for stealing, because that's not a cop's job. But I maintain that is a cop's job.
I think,
it absolutely is. Or even if it's not the cop's job to actually do that, it's the cop's job to go and talk to the people whose job it is and say, listen, have you thought about doing this to your product so it's less likely to be nicked? Have you thought about changing this location so it's less likely to attract burglars or robbers or whatever it happens to be? And that's exactly what I did. It would be a case of posters and graffiti and that sort of thing. There's very, very simple things you can do, inexpensive things you can do to a location to make it less attractive to people who do graffiti, or even difficult to do it. I mean, I mentioned yesterday, putting diagonal battens on wooden hoardings makes it very difficult to stick a poster to it.
Which I think is a brilliant
batten costs
idea.
Nothing.
It
costs nothing.
And it makes it harder to tag it or
poster
it,
graffiti. And it says to anyone who lives in that area, oh, this must be a nice area, they look after it.
Yeah.
And that helps house prices, it helps the sense of sort of people feel safer in an area like that. And the bad guys look at it and say, oh, this is quite well maintained, there must be cameras, there must be people looking at it. They must have what they call a capable guardian, that's the technical term for it. There must be something here that's looking after this area. Maybe I'll go and find someone that's a bit safer,
Yeah.
It's not rocket science, it really isn't.
So what about the story you told me about the vomit and the prostitutes? You have to tell our listeners about that.
Well,
it's fascinating.
Yeah. I say, I should stress, this has nothing to do with me. When I started looking up and trying to find examples of other people doing the same thing as I was, first of all, I found that within my own police service, I mean, the Met Police in London, I think it's the biggest police force in the world. There's about 50,000 staff, and about 35 of those are cops. But, you're dealing with a population of 9 million, which increases to something like 12 million during the day when the commuters come in. And when the tourists come in as well, it's immense. So it's actually not a lot of cops for that many people. But I started finding other cops in the Met who thought the same as I did. So you naturally migrated towards them and got matey with them, and you swapped stories by email and things like this. And then I started looking around for other examples around the world and around the country, and even in other areas of interest. And I started finding all sorts of weird things, like I found a researcher from Oxford University who's been dealing with elephant stampedes, and the way she's been doing it, because people traditionally have done it with guns and tarred ropes and things, and she actually found they were terrified of bees. So she was setting up beehives and things like this to try and keep elephants away. And then I found this Austrian mayor called Dirk Ilgenstein, who works in a sort of border town on the edge of Germany and Poland called Vierlinden, who had an issue with prostitutes. And his issue was that there were just so many of them, because it's a main truck route between Poland and Germany. A lot of vehicles going through, there are a lot of drivers. And the girls just hang around on all the street corners and all the streets. So it was making life pretty unbearable for the people who live there. But prostitution is legal. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just a case of throwing lots of cops at it or judicial system. So he thought about things he could do. First of all, he started working very closely with the sort of prostitutes union and started funding programs to try and get the girls off the street. But there was always still lots of them who wanted to do it because it was easy money, and a lot of girls were coming out from Poland and getting involved as well. So he then started thinking about how can I change the environment. And his rather left field solution was to actually make the environments. I'm told, and this may be purely anecdotal, but I'm told it's because he was walking home one day and he saw how disgusted people were walking around sort of pavement pizzas, the old vomit
pavement pizzas.
The vomit on the street.
I haven't heard that for a long time.
Yeah, and he thought, what a great idea. So he actually got hold of loads of fake vomit, sort of Hollywood fake vomit, and sort of splattered it around the street, but up the ante a little bit by adding some chemicals like butyric acid and scatol and things like this to make it smell like as well. Because there's nothing more powerful than smell. People really don't think about smell.
It makes people wretched, so they don't want to be near
Precisely, and it works the other way as well. I mean, if you want people to sort of buy your bread, you pump bread through the store. If you want people to buy the popcorn, you pump the smell of popcorn through the cinema. Yeah. And, advertisers know this, but it works the other way as well. You start putting the smell of vomit around, people think, do I really want to have sex here? Am I really going to feel amorous when all I can smell is someone's meal from yesterday? No. And I'd love to find out just how successful it was, because I remember the story breaking at the time, and I tried to get hold of him, and I got someone from his office who spoke not bad English, but a bit broken English, and just didn't understand what my interest was. I think they thought I was just some sort of reporter in a paper just trying to sort of make the mayor look stupid or whatever. But I'd love to know just what success he had, but at least he was thinking about it.
Yeah. So, how do you keep teenagers away?
Well, yeah,
there's a top 10 list, I believe.
There is, yeah. I mean, the first thing I would say is I think instead of keeping teenagers away, what I'd much actually rather do is give them something constructive to do, because every piece of evidence I have ever seen, whether it's from sort of the academics or whether it's from police or whether it's from social service, everything I've ever read tells me that kids respond well when you give them something to do. And in my generation, I'm in my 50s, my generation, we had lots to do as kids. We had fewer objects to do it with. We didn't have the mobiles and the computers and that sort of thing. So in some ways, stick and ball, and I was happy. That people say.
No, I had a stick and I was happy with a stick.
Precisely. I mean, if you've got fewer things, then you make more of them and you use your imagination more. But more than that, there was a whole swathe of adults who were willing to do things, to give up their time to help me do things. There were boys' clubs, there were youth clubs, there was the Scouts and the Guides and the Brownies, there were Army cadets, Sea cadets, Air cadets, Boys' Brigade. There were tons and tons of things to do. There was, and there were clubs as well. There were stamp clubs and there were football clubs and there were this and the other. And we've lost something there in the fact that now, certainly in the UK, the average couple, both of them are working. They get home late at night. They're working sort of. With travelling, they're doing sort of 10-hour days. They get home, they just want a glass of wine and slob in front of the telly. They don't want to go out and work with a bunch of stroppy kids, And similarly, there's this culture that's grown up that if you do anything, and little Sally or Hardeep falls over and scuffs you're going to be sued.
Oh, yes.
And of course, the worst thing of all is this media-hyped idea that anyone who wants to work with kids must be a paedophile.
Yeah.
So you don't get the number of activities for kids. So if you don't give kids something to do, they'll do it themselves.
And we used to play in the street, remember?
Precisely, yeah.
And the community would keep an eye on the kids playing.
Absolutely,
and
it's good. It's natural and right. and it's part of growing up to gather in groups and to find, a sense of your own identity. And what you have to do is you have to focus that. And what I found invariably is if you do focus that, you get some amazing results. You get some absolutely amazing results. I was talking to someone yesterday who was saying that a middle-aged filmmaker went into some of the really toughest gangs, people who are stabbing and shooting each other in London, and actually worked with them for about 6 months. And when she walked away at the end of it, they wanted to be filmmakers. Because they'd suddenly seen there was a world beyond their world. Where I've spoken to these kids. I've worked with some of these groups, and some of them I've spoken to have looked me earnestly in the eye, and they don't honestly believe they're going to live past 30.
Wow!
That they're going, and they're perfectly accepting of that. Yeah, and it's you can do things much more positive. You can build. You can take one small area. If you want to sort of chaperone the kids into a certain area, and you haven't got the money for a youth club or whatever, you can build youth shelters. Which is providing them with somewhere to go. It's somewhere that can be theirs, where they can gather, be amongst their own group, and talk, etc., etc. And kids are quite tribal as well. They'll stay in groups, and if you keep those groups separate in these shelters and give them their own little bases, they tend to stick to them. The stuff about keeping kids away, if you have to do it, because there's always going to be some who are troublemakers, then there are ways of doing it. You mentioned the top 10, yeah.
There's music, isn't there?
Music and smell we were talking about. Yeah, music's quite a powerful thing. There is a top 10 of classical music, which I think was put together by one of the supermarket chains in the UK. I think Pachelbel, or Pachelbel, however you pronounce it, is at the top. But there is a top 10 of classical music, most likely to make kids go and walk away.
Well, I know we used to use Barry Manilow in Australia.
Absolutely, I know. Barry's very popular. I was thinking about putting this into a book at one time. One of my chapter headings was, it's no use, we're going to have to up the ante. We're bringing out the Barry Manilow. Just for the chapter on using sound. But in this country anyway, probably wouldn't work in America, but in this country, country and western is very popular as well, because I don't know what it is about country and western, but it kind of grates on Brits. I don't know why, but that's very popular.
So what, do you pipe it out at the end of dark alleyways or something?
Yeah, absolutely, or outside shops, or places where you don't want kids to gather. And it kind of works. I mean, it's better than some of the other solutions. I mean, which are the one I really hate is a thing called the mosquito, which is a box you put on the wall and it emits a high frequency whine, which you can only hear when you're kind of under the age of 25. Because over the age of 25, your hearing just starts to go off a little bit. Because let's face it, you start falling apart once you hit 25, and it's a downward spiral from there.
Yeah.
And and this whine, I've actually heard the frequency up to the bit where it just starts to go. I've actually got a little thing on my laptop where I can do the different sounds, and I've demonstrated it. And it's a really piercing. You don't really hear it. It's like in your skull. But it's non-discriminatory, it will affect every person under the age of 25 who gets within that cone of sound, and that includes babies in prams, for goodness sake. I mean, to my mind, that's a sonic weapon, and we wouldn't take any other part of society, disabled people, black people, Muslim people or whatever, and focus something on them that just harms them and no one else. And there is also some evidence that some types of autism, it actually causes these people physical pain. So I'm not a great fan of those.
Is that used very often? Very much?
Not so much. They were really, really popular a little while ago because they were a cheap option for local authorities. Instead of trying to find, proper things for kids to engage with, just stick some boxes up and drive the problem somewhere else.
Yeah.
There was also things like pink lighting. People were using pink lighting because that came again from looking around at what else was happening in the world and realising that pink lighting is used in the beauty industry, cosmetics industry, to highlight skin blemishes.
Right.
So what you do is you put a nice pink lighting in an underpass, and all the kids are standing around there with their faces going, and they don't want to gather.
Maybe quite sensitive at that point if they've got acne or something.
And this is it. If you've got acne, the last thing you want is someone pointing it out to you. You may have been able to cover it with foundation, but the pink light will find you.
Wow.
I'm much more a fan of actually giving them something meaningful to do, and if you have to keep them away from a certain location, use something a bit safer. I have to say, one of the funniest ones I ever saw, I was down visiting my native Cornwall about 5 years ago, and I was in St Ives, which is a very popular tourist attraction, nice little harbour, lots of little art cafes and galleries, and there was a guy out in the morning with a paintbrush sort of painting what appeared to be just water on his window, and I thought, that's a bit odd. And a little bit later I walked past there, and I saw these kids were all going outside his shop and moving away, and I thought, that's just that. So I went into the shop and asked him, and what he does every morning is he gets sugary water and he paints it on the window of his shop, and it attracts wasps.
No way!
So it dries clear, or maybe just ever so slightly, but it dries clear. But the point is, it doesn't stop people going into his shop and using it. But no one wants to stand outside for any length of time. There's always wasps near his shop. And then I found, I said, I got the idea for a friend of mine. He said he's got a bin outside his shop, and every morning he goes out and throws lots of sugary stuff in the bin. So there's always wasps around the outside of his shop. So they are biological weapons. I love it.
So you're not a cop anymore, are you?
No. I finished a few years ago. I did my 30 years. My 6 months it became 30 years.
So is your dad proud?
He was, yes. I mean, he's dead now, bless him. But he's, he was proud, and he was very pleased. Even though he was a very traditional cop, he was very proud that I'd stood by my guns and sort of stuck with my beliefs. And ultimately, I mean, of the 30 years I did, probably about 15, 18 of them were difficult, let's put it that way. But after a while, people started to realise, not because of me, but because some academics and some other famous people were saying the same thing as I was, that maybe this was a better way forward. And when that shift occurred, then they started looking for people within the organisation who could do it. They said, well, this bloke's been doing it for a few years, and this bloke's been doing it, and this bloke's been doing it, and they put us together to make this little team called the Problem Solving Unit, which for about 10 years we went out and did these sorts of initiatives all over London, and we trained other cops how to do it, and we trained other agencies how to do it, and worked with other agencies to get this working. And but then, my 30 years was up, and I left, and I'd like to think, that there's a little bit of a legacy in the fact that some of the stuff we were doing is still built into training now. The training isn't just about catch the bad guy now. It does talk about the importance of working with communities, engaging with other agencies like the fire service and the National Health Service and local authorities and planners and these sorts of people. So there is a little bit of a legacy there, which I'm very proud of.
So what are you doing now?
It couldn't be more different. I actually write TV and radio shows now.
Oh, okay, obviously.
Yeah, there's a show very popular in the UK. It's a panel show called QI.
Yeah, we have QI at home as well.
Oh, of course, yes, They pump it, and of course
they play it like 4 times a week in Australia.
Yeah, well, they play it about 8 times a day here on some of the satellite channels. But it's we actually went out and did a tour last year of all the cities with Stephen and Alan. But yeah, it's a bit of a weird shift of focus, but curiously, it's that same sort of skepticism, it's that same querying things that sort of led me to them, because I was doing some writing, I was doing quite a bit of blogging. I would quite often go onto the QI forums and put notes on saying, well, actually, have you looked at this as well? And I wrote a book which was called Joined Up Thinking, which came out in 2008, which was all about the interconnectedness between stuff, and it kind of brought me to their attention. And a few years later, I was working on the Museum of Curiosity, which is QI's sister show on BBC Radio 4, and then I ended up working on the scripts for that, and now I'm doing sort of work for the actual TV show itself.
So you're a researcher for them, or?
Yeah, I'm a researcher and writer for the museum, and I'm a researcher for the QI TV show. Although, like all of us, we've all got input to the scripts. I'm there at the moment every Monday on the script meetings, and we start recording a new series in about 2 weeks. So.
Fantastic.
Bit of a change.
Yeah, yeah.
But the same rules apply. The very same rules that sort of made my school days challenging and made my police days challenging is making my new world in the media challenging. But it's a good challenge because it's always constantly questioning. It's always constantly asking the question, is this right? Could this be done better? I'm not going to just blindly accept this. Show me it's right. And that's why I think QI is so successful, because it does. They coin this lovely phrase, general ignorance. The idea that a lot of the things we think we know because it's the accepted orthodoxy or it's what we were taught in school is actually not right. The idea that things do change. There was a wonderful book came out last year by Samuel Arbesman called The Half-Life of Facts. If you get a chance to read it, it's or if you haven't already, it's a great book where he went back through lots and lots of different academic papers in different fields, in physics, biology, etc., and found that there is a half-life in the fact that, by 20 years, a significant proportion, maybe, I can't remember what the figures are, 30, 40% of the information in those papers is wrong. So you have to constantly question, and you have to constantly keep yourself up to date and look at things and not just accept that it's fact. I mean, that's the problem I had in school. I mean, dinosaurs was always a big thing for me. And my teachers were telling me stuff in biology classes which I knew was wrong because it had been superseded by facts. And even then, since then, when I was in school in the 70s, to now, dinosaurs have gone from being these lumbering, dull grey creatures who, in some cases, couldn't support their own body weight and lived in water, to being dynamic, feather-coloured mega chickens.
Mega chickens.
Yeah, it's constantly, the world's constantly changing, so you have to constantly challenge the preconceptions of people who stick within what they learned and don't move on from there, you know. So yeah, and it's lovely to be involved with something like this, with this sort of sceptical thing.
Well, thanks for taking the time to talk to us, Steve.
You're welcome.
So, do you have a website, a blog? Where can people find out more about you?
I do. I mean, there's a website. Well, it's more to do with the artwork and the writing out, which is www.StevynColgan.com. Now, I'm Stevyn, Stevyn, Colgan.com. And I've got a blog called Colganology, which you just put in Colganology, you'll find it. So around, and it covers all sorts of things: art, science, just things I find in the papers that make me.
And what was the name of your book again?
It was called Joined Up Thinking, and I've got another one coming out next month called Constable Colgan's Connectoscope, which is also about interconnectedness of everything. So
cool. All right. Well, thanks, Steve. It's been fascinating talking to you.
Ein großes Hallo an alle deutschen Zuhörer des Skeptic Zone Podcasts. Wusstet ihr, dass es auch in Deutschland einen Skeptikerverband gibt? Für weitere Informationen über uns und das Skeptiker Magazin besucht www.gwup.org. Ich wiederhole, www.gwup.org und unsere offiziellen Facebook, Twitter und Google Plus Seiten.
Here's Maynard's spooky action at a distance.
I have an interesting story for you here. I'm talking to Scott Bartle in Western Australia. Where in WA are you?
Perth.
And the reason I'm talking to you is you had a semi-recent experience about importing a car into Australia. And what's so special about this car, and why did you want to import it into Australia in the first place?
It's a 1959 Chev Corvette. In my travels working overseas, just fell in love with this Corvette. Basically wanted to import that back to Australia, went through the process of doing what I thought was normal at the time and applying for import approval. Eventually that took about 9 months to get import approval, and that's where I started finding out all sorts of different things along this process.
You definitely go down a real rabbit hole here, and I'd succinctly describe what you experienced trying to import a car. And is this a very difficult thing to do? Do many people do this? Is it an unusual thing to bring a single car over?
Not entirely difficult. The real hiccup occurred for me when I was applying for this import approval and following the guidelines that were published to put your application form in. That's when I started really digging deeper and putting together flowcharts to demonstrate that I was actually fully complying with this guideline. And what it turned out was that I couldn't use the guideline because it wasn't law, and yet I'd been quoted from it twice in refusing my application.
What made you think it wasn't law, Scott?
Within the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, that's the argument that the lawyer put forward to the tribunal, that it was a guideline and was not law. The department had quoted from it twice to refuse me, so precedent was that it was usable. Got the import approval after 9 months, got the car on the boat, went through with the import broker to determine every single possible charge that I'd be likely to experience. I knew I was going to pay shipping fees, knew I was going to pay insurance, duty, GST, all of these things. I thought, okay, no problem. Car arrives in Fremantle, and next thing you know, I find out about another charge. I'm now being told that I have to apply for a license, a pre-charged equipment license, which is essentially a license relating to the gas in the air conditioner. And I thought, hang on a minute, I've got this import approval already. Why do I need approval for the air conditioner that's already in the car? Is this just a money grab? And that turned out to be a common practice. There were other guys who were importing their cars who only found out about that license once the car was off the boat, behind the gates, and in the customs area. What's all these money grabs for? Let's start asking a few more detailed questions.
And what did you find out when you did that?
In this 9-month period that I was going head-to-head with the Department of Transport for the import approval, I started noticing some little inconsistencies that seemed odd. I'm seeing a copyright symbol next to the Commonwealth of Australia on various websites. Copyright generally denotes ownership, and this is something that usually goes along with a corporate sort of environment, like Coca-Cola. don't usually want to copyright symbols that relate to a country's heritage. I have run across a couple of lawyers, retired now, who have been going through this material and going, yep, that doesn't add up.
Tell us all about your website so people can have a look at your thoughts and your movie there. And what's another good general constitutional website that you can also compare as well, so we get like a good overview?
Well, my website that I put together is called truth-now.net. Another good website to look up is Larry Hannigan's, larryhannigan.com.au. He does some great work in actually pulling apart some of the various acts and highlighting some of those inconsistencies. They start becoming more obvious when you're attuned to it and are looking for them.
The film is What the Frequently Unanswered Questions, or What the FUQ. Thank you for your time today, Scott Bartle.
Thank you very much.
Virtual Skeptics is a weekly web show in which we discuss the latest news in skepticism.
Whether it's a new case of spontaneous human combustion, a conspiracy theory, the latest update on the upcoming robot apocalypse, tech news for skeptics, or the latest wacky religious claim, we cover it all.
We record the show live as a Google Plus on-air hangout, so join us and our host, Brian Gregory, for an hour of mostly intelligent talk every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern U.S. time.
Watch us at virtualskeptics.com and participate in the show on our hashtag VirtualSkeptics.
The Virtual Skeptics. It's like Meet the Press, but with chupacabras.
What show number was that again, Richard?
Excuse me, hello. Oh, Stefan, good morning.
Jet lag still kicking in.
That was episode number 236.
236?
Yeah.
You're insane.
Oh, yes. And? What's your point?
What's new? Yeah, well, and a great show again, it was.
I love those vampires. They're good stuff. I like vampires. They're interesting vampire-y stuff. And all that Stevyn Colgan with his interesting way to approach problems. I love that stuff. Good stuff indeed.
Yes, the mind is a powerful thing.
It is.
When it's not being turned to jelly by bells or woo-woo.
It's indeed. It is, Stefan. You're absolutely right. Is that the sun setting outside your window or the sun rising? I don't even know what time.
I don't even know either, and I haven't gone anywhere. That's what it's like around these parts. But it's great to have you back, and thanks for all the listeners for continuing to listen at episode 236. Oh, my goodness me.
And keep listening.
Yes.
Because you might notice a double download this week.
Ooh, really?
Really?
Don't say we actually finished that project.
We actually finished that project.
Oh, really? Well, I'm looking forward to hearing how it goes and everyone's reaction to it, because it was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. All right, I'm out of here to go back to bed.
All right, good night, and see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Skeptic Zone. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for comments, contacts, and extra video reports.